Silence. Not the soft, enveloping silence of a relaxed mind slipping into sleep. This was dense, impenetrable quiet. An absence of sound so complete it was like drowning in an endless void. I tried to open my mouth to speak, to scream, to elicit some proof of my existence. But my lips would not part. My vocal cords refused to vibrate. No breath stirred in my lungs. I was paralyzed in every sense, suspended in a sensory vacuum. Even my thoughts seemed to echo wordlessly through the stillness. Had time ceased to exist here too? Seconds or centuries could be passing. There was no way to know. I strained all my consciousness toward moving even a single muscle. The effort yielded only exhaustion as I struggled against invincible bonds. Gradually, an even more terrifying realization dawned on me. I had no body. No nerves to send signals of movement. My sense of touch had been utterly stripped away, leaving me without the surety of physical form. I was just a fragmented stream of thoughts, adrift in complete darkness. Was there a before to this? Flickers of memory taunted me, flashes of light, laughter, the feeling of rain on my skin. But they twisted away when I grasped for them, as insubstantial as smoke. Only the darkness remained. It pressed down with crushing weight, swallowing up those elusive snatches of sensation until all was smothered in black silence again. I would weep if I still possessed eyes or tears. Instead, I keened wordlessly into the void, begging for some response. Even pain would be proof that I still existed. But there was only the interminable nothingness. Somehow, impossibly, I had been buried alive within myself. How long must this oblivion last? Hours or lifetimes later, impatience finally sparked through the smothering confusion. But almost before the emotion surfaced, it bled away, like blood dispersing in dark water. Time refused to march onward here. There were no beginnings or endings in this place, only an eternal now, devoid of sensation. Perhaps this was some twisted afterlife. Or a fever dream from which I would suddenly wake, drenched in sweat but gloriously alive. I clung desperately to that possibility as the darkness ground relentlessly onward. Some logical part of me knew this was no dream. No imagined nightmare could be so thorough in its cruelty, stripping away every shred of tactile reality. Which left only one unthinkable possibility, death. The word cut cold and merciless through the void. Was this perverse purgatory what lay beyond the shroud of mortality? An intangible half-life, trapped in stasis between worlds? Panic clawed at me now, the most welcome sensation I had felt in this non-existence. Anything was better than the numb oblivion. I let the fear course through me, embraced the jittery tingling of adrenaline. My racing thoughts collided with half-formed memories of sunlight and solid ground. There must be some way back, some overlooked path out of this empty labyrinth. Frantic, I hurled myself against the boundaries of my prison. But there were no walls to strike, no light to run toward, only the yawning darkness in all directions. Exhausted by that fruitless struggle, I retreated once more into stillness. But now the silence had taken on new dimensions. A watchful quality I could not name but could keenly sense. No longer empty, the darkness teemed with unseen presences, heavy with expectancy. I knew then this was no escape from mortality, but a strange new realm with its own unknowable rules. Tendrils of dread replaced the adrenaline now. Surely no loving God would craft so twisted an afterlife? Which left only one conclusion, too horrible to fully comprehend: I had descended to some nether region of lost souls. The waiting presences seemed to press closer as this grim revelation solidified. I recoiled inward, willing my fragmented being to disappear, escape back into oblivious non-existence. Their unseen scrutiny scoured me raw, peeling back layers of defenses until only trembling essence remained. A susurrus emerged from the dark, sibilant whispers that slithered into my thoughts. My mind convulsed in primal terror at the intrusion. I strained to block out the insidious sounds which formed no recognizable words, only insinuations too dark to grasp. But still they continued, curling through my consciousness like cold fingers probing vulnerable flesh. I writhed in silence, pleading for their torture to cease. But my voiceless agony only seemed to draw them nearer. One whisper coiled tighter than the rest, languid and taunting. It wound through my mind, scattering rational thought like leaves before a frigid wind. Icy tendrils leached the remaining heat from my essence, leaving me shivering and hollow. Then, from the fathomless dark, came one repeated word. A shattered mirror held up to reflect my own fractured state. "Alone," hissed the merciless voice. "Alone. Alone." I recoiled deeper into myself, denying its claim even as my very existence bore it out. There must be more than this, more than the frozen solitude it condemned me to. Somewhere within these shadowed depths, there must be shreds of light, moments of warmth to stitch together a tapestry of memory that would lead me back to the living world I had lost. I clung to this fragile hope as the whispers receded. Their cold fingers withdrew reluctantly, as though certain of my eventual surrender. In their wake, I was left hollowed out and trembling, but resolute. I must recover what had been taken from me if I was ever to escape this place. Timidly at first, then with gathering focus, I sifted through the dark fragments within my splintered consciousness, grasping at emotions, sounds, fleeting recollections of sensation. I must start with my own name, anchor myself again in identity. Emily. The designation emerged slowly from some hidden recess, bringing with it flashes of mesa-red hair sweeping over pale cheeks. Other shards fell into place, like ash swept together by a mournful wind. Emily Morrison, 34. Only child. Software engineer. Lived alone, preferred the company of machines to people. Remembered her mother's embrace, her father's laughter. The memories gained momentum, bright shards piercing the darkness. I clung to them desperately even as they tore fresh wounds through my essence. I saw Emily striding through the sterile fluorescence of her workplace, always alone amongst the faceless coders slaving over their keyboards. Emily going home to her sleek, modern apartment, microwaving a plastic-wrapped meal in one clinical motion before losing herself in lines of code once more. Her ambition was a shield against loneliness, her work an escape from deeper human needs. Relationship after relationship foundered on the rocks of her one true love, the ordered, logical realm of numbers and algorithms. But buried beneath that cool facade was a yearning for connection, a desire to be truly understood. As a child, Emily had woven secret worlds out of stories and make-believe, imaginary friends her closest companions. The savage bite of rejection when those same friends cruelly excluded her from playground games left scars that never healed. So she walled off that part of herself that craved companionship. It was easier to avoid the harsh judgments of other children, and later, other adults. If you poured your passion into the perfect code, the flawless program, there was no risk of hurt. Her machines would never betray her. But now, cast adrift in eternal nothingness, the cost of that isolation cut to the bone. How many people had glimpsed her essential self behind the walls and turned away, sighed at her social awkwardness, quietly excluded her from the easy warmth of friendship. She had convinced herself it was better, safer that way. Now the loss of what could have been ached like an old wound in rain. She would give anything for the sound of another human voice, the brush of a comforting hand on her shoulder. But this shadow realm offered only eerie whispers and terrible solitude. Still I clung to the memories, piecing together a mosaic of Emily's life, searching for the fragments that would lead me back to the living world again. There, a cabin by a moonlit lake. Emily stood on the deck, breathing in the pine-scented air. She came here after her mother's funeral, escaping the gaping emptiness of the house she grew up in. Out here, she could pretend it never happened, that she would walk in the door and see her mother's smile again. The kindness in my mother's eyes was a salve for childhood loneliness. Our weekend trips to the cabin were a refuge from schoolyard politics and my father's emotional distance. She would pack the old car with fishing poles and sandwiches, her curly hair blowing in the wind as we cruised along the shoreline. How desperately I had wished my classmates could know her gentle wisdom and wit. Surely their teasing would stop if they saw me through her eyes, as the sensitive child she understood so well. But that wish remained unfulfilled. She was my secret sanctuary, her death leaving me untethered, set adrift on a sea of unkind faces and judging eyes. The night after we buried her, I sat on the cabin deck until dawn stained the lake crimson. Numb and exhausted, I stared blindly across the still water. If I concentrated hard enough, I could imagine her warm hand enclosing mine, the comfort of her voice reassuring me I was never alone. Delirious in my grief, I thought I glimpsed her form walking across the misty water, beckoning me to follow. Some part of me longed to wade into the lake's cold embrace, let the ripples close over my head, rejoin her in the beautiful isolation of the deep. But as the first rays of sun shattered the illusion, the practical part of my mind rebelled. I had a life yet to live. I could not abandon it, no matter how lonely the road ahead seemed. Reluctantly, I turned my back on the lake that morning and drove away from the cabin for the last time. In the years that followed, I buried myself in work, shutting out the persistent ache and loneliness. On the worst nights, I let the screen's glow wash over me until sunrise, coding falling in a hypnotic rhythm from my fingers. The memory fades, dimming back into the darkness. Panic rises in me again. I was close, standing at the threshold between life and afterlife. If I could just push a little further back. But the more I grasp for the details, the more elusive they become. The presences begin to stir, awaiting my inevitable surrender. Their whispers promise an end to struggle, temptation to drift endlessly in their cold embrace, shedding the last fragments of mortal memory. I recoil from their seductive darkness, scrabbling desperately through my fractured mind. There must be more, some final hidden spark that will illuminate the path back. Another scene flickers a light in the shadows. I clutch at it frantically as the dark presences loom closer, eager to devour the memory before it can fully form. Emily sits on the curb outside a bar, knees hugged tight to her chest. Her breath escapes in trembling gasps, matching the sobs that convulse her thin frame. It's 3 a.m., the night air biting cold. The street is empty. She rocks back and forth, her movement having become compulsive over the past hour. The minutes tick by, endless as she waits alone for the effects to subside. Back and forth. Her mind loops on an inescapable track. Why hadn't she listened when Tom asked her to slow down and drink some water? The night had started with laughter over dinner and then moved on to the bar where they both let loose. Drinks had seemed like a fine way for two anxious souls to unwind and make tentative connection. Emily never was one for bars or heavy drinking. But there was something about Tom's shy smile and obvious nerves that charmed her, made her want to push past her own boundaries. When he tentatively reached for her hand over cocktails, she found herself interlacing her fingers with his, marveling at the comforting solidity. As the night wore on, their shared confessions came more easily over a haze of alcohol. For once, Emily felt she had met someone who understood the lifelong ache of not fitting in. Who saw the tender heart behind the awkward exterior. So when Tom gently suggested it was time to close their tabs and call it a night, Emily had insisted on one more drink. Just a little something to keep this magical mood going. In her giddy inebriation, one more seemed harmless. Tom acquiesced with an uncertain smile, and Emily triumphantly waved over the bartender. As she lifted the next cocktail to her lips, the room tilted around her, objects blurring in uneasy smears of color. Clapping a hand over her mouth, she had lurched from her bar stool toward the bathroom, knowing with awful certainty she was going to be sick. On the way, her shoulder collided heavily with a large man in a leather jacket. Before Emily even had a chance to stammer out an apology, meaty hands shoved her to the floor. A looming shadow fell over her. "Watch where you're going, bitch." Face burning with humiliation, Emily struggled to get her limbs under control, to find some scathing retort. But nothing coherent made it past her lips before the contents of her stomach spewed out instead. Raucous laughter exploded around her as she crouched there, trembling. Through the tears blurring her vision, Emily saw Tom hovering nearby, face pale with concern or disgust, she couldn't tell. In the end he had helped her outside, awkwardly patting her shoulder before going back into the bar to close their tabs. That was an hour ago now. Emily hugged her knees tighter on the curb, the night air raising icy goosebumps along her arms. How foolish she had been, thinking alcohol could erase a lifetime of social ineptitude. She was an idiot for believing, even for a moment, that someone could truly understand her. Her thoughts spiraled into a dark vortex, every moment of rejection and humiliation from the past flooding back in lurid detail. She was condemned to always be the awkward misfit, vomiting her guts out alone while the rest of the world laughed. Even gentle, understanding Tom had abandoned her when things got messy. Sometime before dawn, Emily finally pulled herself to unsteady feet and managed to phone a ride home. As she crawled into bed and pulled the covers tight, tremors still racking her depleted body, she made a silent vow. No more alcohol, no more bars. No more misguided attempts to force connections that would only end in pain. From now on, she would rely only on herself and take solace in her work. The algorithms never judged her for who she was at her core. They welcomed her perfectionism and rewarded her talents. She would redouble her efforts at the office, until she made herself invaluable and erased every lingering doubt of her worth. Let the rest of the world go on grasping at flimsy relationships built on lust or shared intoxication. None of them would ever truly know her. It was time to stop reaching for the impossible and embrace the safety of solitude. She was destined to walk this path alone. The memory fades, retreating once more into the dark. But this time, a pinprick of light glimmers in the infinite distance. I race toward that precious point of light, feeling it strengthen and expand as the dark presences fall away in defeat. The light blossoms into a familiar bedroom. Pale rays of dawn filter through sheer curtains as Emily's eyelids flutter open. The pounding in her skull makes itself known first, throbbing in time with her heartbeat. When she tries to move her limbs, they feel leaden, pinned in place by an unaccountable weight. Panic threatens as she realizes she cannot draw breath into her lungs. Has she become paralyzed in the night? Only her vision seems to function, gazing helplessly around the room. But everything appears normal in the growing daylight. She struggles silently, desperately trying to inflate her lungs or regain control of her motionless body. But it's no use. Utterly paralyzed and breathless, a creeping unease slithers up her spine. She cannot ignore the truth taking form. Somehow, impossibly, her racking sobs, racing thoughts, and vows in the night had not been part of some alcohol-fueled nightmare. She had passed from living world into this purgatory the moment her eyes closed on her pillow. The room looks different now, overlaid with a deathly pallor to all its familiar objects. Emily stares upward, finally glimpsing her own face reflected in the vanity mirror. Pale skin, blue-tinged lips, eyes that hold dawning horror as they stare without blinking. Is nothing to strain with, no hands to cling with or voice to cry out in protest. Inside she is only howling anguish as the EMTs efficiently wrap her abandoned body in a shroud and carry it from the room. No, oh please no. Her soundless pleas echo only in her mind as awful certainty descends. She is a ghost, her body lying lifeless beneath the covers she can no longer feel. The pounding in her skull is only an echo, some misfiring of dying synapses before all goes still forever. This can't be real. Emily silently shrieks into the void, straining again to shatter the awful paralysis. But just like her heavy limbs, the truth pins her in place. She remembers now stumbling from the bathroom to this bed after that horrific night at the bar, her final living acts before whatever waited in the night claimed her. Despair threatens to crush what little essence remains. She thrashes soundlessly, railing against the confines of a body she can no longer inhabit. Is this her eternity, mute and motionless in this meaningless twilight between worlds? The light brightens beyond the curtains, indifferent to her invisible struggle. As she watches in helpless horror, her bedroom door swings slowly inward. A uniformed man and woman enter, their grave expressions confirming her greatest fear. EMTs, here to collect and dispose of the empty husk she can no longer call home. Don't let them take me. She strains desperately toward her still form under the covers. But there is nothing to strain with, no hands to cling with or voice to cry out in protest. Inside she is only howling anguish as the EMTs efficiently wrap her abandoned body in a shroud and carry it from the room.